workshop to order. If you Councilman Buddy Fowler, if he'll lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's bow our heads. Father, we come to you this morning with a humble heart, knowing through you all things are possible. We ask you to continue to bless this country. Father, bless this council that's trying to do the work in the town of Surf City. Father, we are thankful to see the people here today that's coming out to listen and participate in our council meeting. Father, we ask you to be with our soldiers that are overseas, bring them home to safely to their families. Father, be with those that are sick. Lend your healing hand, bring them through. Be with the doctor so that they may diagnose and heal those. Father, we ask all these things in your most precious name. Amen.
And ask our Councilman Buddy Fowler if he'll lead us in our pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and you may be seated. And at this time, we will call on our town manager, I guess, or you want to call on, who you calling on?
I'll go ahead and introduce the first item, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, council and staff and audience here today. So the Parks and Recreation Department is requesting a budget ordinance amendment to increase revenues and expenses for programming through the middle of about 7 months into the fiscal year. So the budget ordinance amendment that you have here will provide an additional $38,179 to athletics expenses, but then matched with the same amount of revenue going through. So we did look at a calculation throughout the remainder of the fiscal year, and we'll still find ourselves approximately $16,000 in the positive for athletics programming. The department did add a couple of items to their roster this year, which coupled with additional expenses with jerseys, et cetera, and also, this is a good problem to have, but our participation has been just through the roof for all of our programs. So that is the reason for the budget ordinance amendment. I can try to answer any questions that you have, and then our Parks Director, Jody Shepard, is here to answer any questions as well.
Can I make a comment?
Okay. You got any questions?
I have a comment.
Okay.
The amendment that's asked for, they have projected income, and they've exceeded that income. Our expenses, as you know, as everything else through inflation has risen, and this still stays within the guidelines of what they've set down for the budget over the past years. And it's needed because our participation level, there was a big demand for our participation level to increase, and we tried to meet those demands by adding on some programs, and therefore that's what caused this to exceed some of the things we were looking for. But I do think it's needed. I think it still provides a great service for the community, and I certainly am in line with approving it.
Okay. Jody, you got anything you want to add? Okay. All right.
I don't have anything else to add other than, we can just get a consensus, move this to March, and we'll get it on the consent agenda.
Okay. Do I have a consensus of all the board?
Yes.
Okay. Put that on the March agenda. Okay. All right. Pay study overview.
All right, Mr. Mayor and Council, thank you again. Wanted to introduce you to the results of our pay study. This is a project that we undertook this fiscal year as a priority for the town to start looking at where we sit within market rate for not just adjoining jurisdictions, but other jurisdictions that may be similar. So before I get into too much detail within the memo and the recommendations that I'm providing, I did want to introduce Mr. David Hill, who has been contracted through the Cape Fear Council of Governments, but they work with their network of council of governments and has come to us from the Piedmont area. So Mr. Hill is going to go over the presentation with you. I did print that out for you. It's also within your folder if you want to follow along on your computer. And at this point, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Kyle. As I begin the PowerPoint, a pay and classification study is just a series of interlocking processes. So in the study, I spend about 85% of my time studying just the position without regard to individual employees. So in the information you're going to see, the focus of that is primarily on the position. And then in that final 10, 15% of the time, after we're pretty comfortable about where each position needs to be in accordance with the market, then we start taking a look at individual employees. The very first slides we're going to take a look at, and okay, next slide. The first couple of slides we're going to take a look at is just a snapshot of your workforce at the very beginning of the study. So this is data based on one of the very first spreadsheets I received from Lydia, and it provided to me that snapshot, that moment in time of what you look like. That provided to me some benchmark data as I started gathering data from all the other locations. So when we look at the data, my vision of the world, if the sample size is large enough, the outcome of any measurement should look like a standard deviation, should look like the bell curve. And in a mature workforce, and the definition of mature workforce is changing quite rapidly. My former definition of a mature workforce is that you would have an average length of employment of between 8 and 10 years. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. But in a mature workforce, with the backdrop of standard deviation, you should be able to find about 2/3 of your workforce within the middle 1/3 of that bell curve. And that's whether you're measuring employee performance or any other measurement. So this is the backdrop. So when we look at the next couple of slides, I will apologize at this point. I have a technical inability to reproduce a bell curve. So when you look at the charts hereafter, my bell curves look like St. Louis arches. So next slide. So that's a great example of my St. Louis arch. So one of the very first things I take a look at is how long have your employees been working here? You have an average length of employment of 6.7 years. So you're approaching that lower threshold of having a mature workforce. But what you see on that slide is, even though you got an average years of employment of 6.7, you have a considerable number of employees who've been with you a relatively short period of time. So you can see located there in the bottom left of the slide, the breakdown of employees and how long they've been working for you. So you've got some long-serving employees, but you can see from that chart alone that you have a considerable number of relatively brand new employees. Next slide. This is a measurement of where are salaries of individual employees measured as a percent above the minimum of their pay grade range. So this particular slide almost mirrors the slide that we looked at to begin with. Your employees have been with you a relatively short period of time. They haven't had an opportunity. They haven't been employed with you long enough for their salaries to have advanced. But you can see that there's a greater distribution of salaries in this chart than there are employment dates. So you do have a process, a program, salary administration, that is allowing employees to come to work at salaries greater than the minimum. And that's a measurement against your market because you're in a relatively very competitive market. Next slide. So then I took a look at the last 10%, typically the last 10%, but in your case, I took a look at the last 12 months of those new employees who came to work for you. And this is a distribution by department of where those employees in the last 12 months came to work. And you can see what those departments are. The next slide is those very same employees and what position did they come to work in. So the first of these two slides was a measurement of those employees who came to work in the previous 12 months, again, from that point in time when I started your study. What department did they go to work in, and what classification, what position did they go to work in? I use this kind of information to take a look at, is there anything that really stands out? Is there a lot of turnover in particular classifications? A lot of turnover in particular departments? But this is, again, the snapshot of what you looked like in September when I started really taking a look at your data. Next slide. Okay, next slide. So the process in the number of processes. Each of your employees, well, I held introductory kickoff sessions with all of your employees. The purpose of that session or those sessions was to explain to employees what the study was, what I would be doing, the expectations I had of them. Employees then completed a 12-page position description questionnaire. That's 12 pages of them telling me everything that they do on their job, describing and outlining every element of the position that they hold. I met individually with department directors. That was an opportunity for me to meet with the department directors to gain some insight into the organization of their department. I then came back on site and interviewed a number of individual employees. Again, all of that was part of the process of me gaining as much information as I could from as many sources as I could about each of the positions. And then I'm collecting and analyzing all the relevant data that from all of those local governments that we took a look at, measuring your positions to similar positions in all of those other local governments. And I say similar because there are no two same positions in local government in the state of North Carolina. Every position is a little different. So next slide. So these are the 15 local governments that we collected data from, measured your positions, compared your positions to. But when I begin a study, actually the first thing I do is look at a Google map because I'm looking at all of those local governments that are within a 30-mile, maybe a 30-minute, maybe a 45-minute, maybe even up to an hour drive from here. And I do that because greater than 90% of your employees will not relocate to another part of the state to go to work for another local government. Now, will they leave their driveway tomorrow morning and drive in a different direction and go to work for another local government? So important to me in these studies are who are those local governments that are the direct competitors for the same talent that you would hope would come to work here. So these are those 15 local governments that we took a look at. Next slide. This is an example of what is that information that I gather from these other local governments. And what are the kinds of things that I look for, look at, try to analyze, compare. So this is just a generic position showing for that particular position what's the pay grade range that all of these other local governments have that position in. Below the green line is the percentage difference of how you measure against the actual or average salary. Now, you, like most of the local governments I work for, you have a number of positions that are very competitive, are probably right where they should be. You have a number of classifications that are not competitive to the market, and part of my recommendations would be to bring those positions up to market. So then in that last 15% of the time I spend on your study is where we take a look at individual employees. And then if we're going to move this particular position from a grade 7 to a grade 8, for example, where then does the salary of that employee or those employees in that particular position need to be? Next slide. Currently, you have 3 separate pay plans. The fire department has its own pay plan, police department has its own pay plan. And then the one on the far left is the pay plan that all other employees are administered on. Well, when I look at those 3 pay plans, there's not significant difference in the 3 plans. So when you start measuring pay grade ranges and minimum salaries from one to the other, there's not a significant difference. So one of my recommendations is to eliminate the 3 pay plans and just administer all employees off the same pay plan. But I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth here when I say that there's not a significant difference in the 3 pay plans, therefore you should only have one. But out of the other side of my mouth, I would say there still needs to be consideration because of market conditions, in that you would have the ability, if needed, to adjust the fire pay plan or the police pay plan to meet market conditions without affecting the others. So while I'm recommending that you go to one pay plan, I would not close the door on having separate pay plans. Next slide. Next slide. So this is what the one pay plan would look like. And it just required a small change with that very minimum amount in that first grade. We moved that up to $31,200. That's the equivalent of $15 per hour. So this is a pay plan that employees would be administered on and has a minimum beginning salary for the lowest position of $15 per hour. And we made some small adjustments in the range, but very insignificant changes. Okay, next slide. So we took a look at quite a number of different options. And we worked through all of those, looked at the pros, looked at the cons, took a look at a lot of different things. And when I get to at the end of the study, I'll be presenting a written report to Kyle that have all of the detailed information in this. But one of those recommendations is going to be to adopt a salary administration philosophy statement, very similar to a mission and vision statement. You, and I'm just making this up, you have a mission or vision statement that you want to be the leader in the provision of services in the state of North Carolina. Well, to do that, of course, you have to have the workforce that can do what you need for them to do so that you have that, or that you can meet your vision. This talks about how you administer employees. This is the creation of an identity of who Surf City wants to be as an employer. So this contains a whole lot of information, and I'll have more detailed information in the report that I provide to Kyle. But one of the recommendations is that you take a look at this salary administration philosophy statement, and my recommendation that it would become an approved board philosophy statement. Okay, next slide. So the actual recommendation that I'm bringing to you this morning. That example that I showed you of that collection of market data compared and analyzed, and what kind of recommendation would I make from that? I did that for every one of your positions. Every one of your classifications has a worksheet very similar to that. And from that information, my recommendation is that we move each of your positions to the pay grade that's supported by that market information, that's commensurate with that information. But all of those that we looked at were designed to address your market competitive position, because that then follows the focus that I then placed on all of that data. Okay, next slide. So take each position and put it in, assign it to the pay grade that's commensurate with the market data. And then salaries back to the bell curve. I also use that bell curve in a different form and fashion to create what's known as a compa ratio model, where I assign values across that range from the minimum to the midpoint being the highest point of the bell curve. In reality, that if you're looking at your pay grade range, that highest point of the bell curve is the midpoint. That's where you would expect to find a number of employees. So the focus was on that market value and along that range, each point along that range has a value that's attached to another formula, and the details of all of this will be in my report, based on how long each of your employees have been in their current position. So that then becomes the measurement. Where do employee salaries need to be in accordance with how long have they actually been in their position? That addresses several different things, primarily salary compression. You've got an employee who's been with you a relatively long period of time, who may currently have a salary that's down near the minimum or on the low end of the salary. You've just brought a brand new employee to work who may be making the same as or nearly the same as that person who's been with you a while. So the purpose of this time in position model is that that employee who's been with you a while then will have their salary adjusted along the range in accordance with that time, so that they now are earning more than that brand new employee who came to work. So the whole focus of the recommendations is to move each of the positions to that market-supported pay grade range, and then adjust employee salaries to fit along that pay grade range in accordance with the time that they've spent in the current position. We did add, because there were a number of employees whose repositioning would have resulted in a considerable salary adjustment. And talking with Kyle and working through that process, we thought probably the best way to take a look at that is that each employee would receive the pay grade adjustment associated with their time in position up to a maximum of 10%. So with that in mind, in the next slide, you will see what the cost of those two recommendations primarily. Positioning each of the classifications to be competitive to the market, establishing employee salaries in accordance with their time in position. So a very brief overview. More detailed information will be in the report that I'll provide to Kyle, but glad to answer any questions at this point that you might have.
The position that you use to example for market collection data for the, where we fell at in the 10 or 15 municipalities you looked at, roughly where did we fall in that 15? Did we fall 7? Did we fall 8? Did we fall on number 9? Was it 10, or did you have that information?
You were above average
Okay,
overall.
That's what I was asking. Okay, thank you.
Did you take in consideration the differences in the hours? Like the fire department works 24 hours,
Right,
police department works 12-hour
Right.
shifts, and the other employees here work 8-hour shifts.
correct.
And their vacation is different because of them working 24-hour shifts and
Yes.
12-hour shifts.
Yes,
And their sick leave is accumulated differently because of
yes,
their work schedule.
excellent. Yes, sir.
And I think that's the reason we got into, as you said, 3 different pay, regular employees, fire, and police that's the reason we got to that.
Yes, sir.
Because everything's figured different in the fire department, police department, than it is regular employees.
Yes, sir. When I'm comparing the data, I'm comparing police officers to police officers everywhere else.
Right.
Firefighters to firefighters everywhere else. Or manager to manager everywhere else. So I'm looking at annual salary without regard to the number of hours that it took to get that employee to that annual salary amount. I almost have to do that because not every fire department works the same schedule, not every police department works the same schedule. Not every administrative office works the same schedule.
Right.
So I have to look at the annual salary without regard, again, to the number of hours that they worked, because, again, I'm not comparing firefighters to administrative staff. I'm not comparing police to fire. I'm comparing police to police, fire to fire, administration to administration, against all those 15 other places. And you're right, if you looked at the work schedule, police officers typically work 2,184 hours. Firefighters work anywhere from 2,800 up to 2,900. There are some fire departments, their schedule, firefighter will work 2,904 hours in a year. Other staff would only work 2,080 hours a year. So yes, all of that's part of that, but at the end of the day, I'm looking at annual salaries.
A breakdown of like where we stand compared to other cities where the average, what's the average that we're above or below? You're gonna bring that back?
Yes. That'll be in the report, yes, that'll present to
You
Kyle.
know, to his point, I noticed that the police and fire start off at a higher grade
Yes,
than anybody else does.
yeah, and that's an accommodation to the hours that they work,
Right.
which leads to the market average of salaries that those similar positions currently are at. It has nothing to do with anything, and I don't know if the chief has had any employees, but talking about police, for the last 2 years, the Highway Patrol has been unable to conduct a class. So they right now are aggressively recruiting for people to come and be part of the next Highway Patrol trooper class. Deadline for applications is next Tuesday. To show you how aggressive they've become, while a candidate is in school, they're making about a little over 37, maybe $38,000. The moment that they walk across their little graduation stage, get their car, their salary immediately goes to $48,700. Highway Patrol has an aggressive salary movement process in place that by the 6th year, from the time that trooper graduates from school, 48,000. By their 6th year of employment, that trooper will be making over $70,000. That's how aggressive that they've become. And again, I don't know if the chief has had any experience losing anybody to the Highway Patrol, but they currently are aggressively recruiting across the state. For all emergency services, it's a tough market. And certainly the demand for services from police and fire and everybody else is not decreasing. But what we're faced with is the number of qualified, interested candidates for those positions continues to decrease. So you have you against those 15 just here in your part of North Carolina, you versus those 15 other governments competing for a lot of the same candidates.
Well, our police department and fire department has been fairly aggressive on salary
Yes,
increases. So
yes.
we shouldn't be way behind, are we?
No, you're above average.
Above average, right? So,
What about our other departments, like the
water and sewer.
water and sewer department? I mean, they're on call, they get called out a lot. I mean, just as
And
far
that's,
as their
and
time.
that's where a lot of this cost comes from. You've got, you had a couple of positions that were really off the mark, against the market. But as a group, probably those positions that you're talking about are going to see adjustments.
Because you see, someone that's been working like water and sewer that are, been at this one set salary, and then you see someone that comes in
Yeah.
and starts cutting grass is making the same amount of money.
Yes. And that's why we looked at that time and position model, because that one that's been here with you,
Right.
their salary is going to get an advancement.
So you saying a car is not broken, it just needs to be washed and cleaned up to make it better advertising, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You guys have done a really good job, actually.
Thank
I presented to a county government yesterday. When we got to this slide, their implementation cost was over $6 million. They were way behind.
Well, I appreciate the report, and appreciate you taking the time to do it and giving us something to look at and go on. We've always tried to provide for our employees and tried to be fairly competitive in the market so we can retain our employees because we value our employees. They do a fantastic job for the town. And with this, it just looks like we need to, as I said, need to wash it and clean it up a little bit, and we're still going down the road.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So with these options, basically, probably what we're gonna have to look at moreover is, do we wanna do it in 1 year or do it in 2 years? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's certainly an option.
Do what?
That's certainly an option.
Yeah. So we gotta let David bring us a budget first. Right, Kyle?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. So if I may, I'll kind of jump in and sort
go
of
right
go
ahead.
over some of the supplemental information. And Mr. Hill, fantastic to work with and very, very comprehensive in his evaluation. And, you know, that time and position factor, you know, I thought was something that the town certainly would want to take a look at. So with that recommendation, you know, that option 3B set that percentage maximum adjustment at 10%. So essentially, you know, that can be broken down by council if you so choose to a gradual percentage adjustment, you know, 5 years this year, or 5% this year, 5% next year, you know, however we feel like we need to do that. And those figures, additional figures were calculated and provided to you with that printout of the pay study option cost. So you'll see, within there that option 3A breaks that down to 5%. So you can see what that number looks like. And what we will do is measure this figure and tie it to the growth of the town in regards to our general fund revenues and also some enterprise fund revenues for water and sewer and see where we're at. Because as we understand, this budget process is always a balance. It's going to need to be met with priorities. And, you know, is bringing salary adjustments for town employees going to be a top priority this year, or is it going to be streets? You know, that's the stuff that we are going to have to take a look at because it is a big bite to take off. However, it's something that, you know, was something that council wanted to look at and see where we're at. And, you know, going back to Mr. Hill's comment about equitable, you know, we can't pull out certain departments with this pay study and only address those. You know, we have to apply it townwide, but, you know, the percentage is being applied to certain positions, and we try not to speak about individuals within those positions, but those are going to range from you know, no percent to well greater than 10%. So even if we did 10%, there's still going to be certain positions that we have a job to do to try to bring those up over the next, you know, few fiscal years so that they are at that market set standard. The other good thing about this is that time and position factor can be applied annually so that those base salaries for all positions get adjusted through basically market inflation. So, you know, what Mr. Hill has provided us is certainly we have now tools that we can use as a town, not having to rely on even though we appreciate his services, but not having to rely on Mr. Hill or a consultant coming in year over year. And we now have those tools that we can maintain in our own house to be applied in future fiscal years to take a look at this. So the secondary, tertiary levels of this review is that, you know, we wanted to not just look at what the market rate salaries were, but, you know, how can we open this up and evaluate, you know, incentives for employees to the town that come through monetary values. So, you know, the town certainly provides, you know, excellent benefit structure and package, but that sometimes, in my opinion, is overlooked through the recruitment process. And you know, that's one half of what this study is, recruitment and retainment. So what we wanted to look at were a couple of other things, and those also address trying to bring folks that are making a commitment and a career obligation to themselves with Surf City to better our community. The first thing that we looked at was trying to look at implementing some sort of longevity pay. So longevity essentially is rewarding employees that have made that significant career commitment to the town, which promotes institutional knowledge, which is key in a lot of areas that we deal with. So generally, longevity can be paid through a one-time like bonus amount. So if you're here for 5 years, you get $500. Or you can look at it as an equitable percentage of a salary, 1%, 2%. You know, we can define what that percentage is and apply that to the overall salary of the position year over year. So what we did was provided some options for recommendation, looking at a 1% increase for 5-year employees, and then moving that up to the scale in 5-year increments once you basically get to 25 to 30 years within the town. And what was presented, I think, was 4.5%, you know, from that 25 to 30 year time frame. So the other identified factor was a cost of living adjustment. Again, this is a necessary tool when we are impacted by external influences that we can't control. So national trends that are going to show that inflation is addressing the town, but we don't have to adopt the set inflation percentage. But if we do a fraction of that year over year, then our salaries are remaining in line again with that market standard. So last year, I'll just give this as an example. We utilized the consumer price index and was set at approximately 1.7%. So this board adopted that 1.7% as the cost of living adjustment, but then, you know, we are above 7% next year. And I cannot recommend that we would adopt 7%. It's not sustainable for our revenues because we're not going to match that. We're not increasing our taxes by 7%. We're not increasing our water and sewer fees by 7%. So we have to try and see where we fall in line and what we can afford. That cost of living adjustment, can certainly continue to be implemented, and I would recommend that we continue to do that. We just have to make sure that it's tied to some sort of standard as that's right, and we've done that, over the last year or so. The next thing that I wanted to kind of take a look at, and something I think that the town has certainly needed for additional incentives for employees is a performance pay structure. And lo and behold, our policies already include performance pay within them. We just haven't had a defined process in which the town wants to implement that performance pay. So what I would recommend is that if the town wants to pursue this performance pay structure, that we tie this to our annual evaluation process. So over the last 2 years, I'll only speak on that because that's what I know, but over the last 2 years, each employee within this organization has been evaluated based on their performance, and that is set through a standard metrics of how well the employee is innovative in their job, and you get a score of 1 through 4. And there's multiple factors, actually a 9-page evaluation form, but then at the end of that is where supervisors and employees have the opportunity to set mutually established goals, which may include achieving certain tasks within the town that further the mission and vision of the town, as well as advancement and certifications and education. And those can be combined into what I would see as a multi-factor evaluation and application of performance pay. So if you score within, that 1 to 4 range, that can define a certain percentage, but then you couple that with the completion of your goals for the fiscal year, and then we can sum those two together and apply that to a percentage. I give an example of somebody might complete all the tasks and do a tremendous job out in the field, but treats the customer not very well, or does things with these other standard metrics that should damper their overall performance and through their evaluation process. So what I also did was provided you a sample of what an employee can expect to see within their performance standards and goals, which should be achievable and obtainable within that fiscal year. So that's on that printout that says sample and is also in your folder. And then also tying the organization's core values into each of those objectives in which we are applying performance standards for our employees. So regardless, I say that to say this, regardless if we're rewarding employees with additional pay, these are the types of goals and objectives that employees are held to through that evaluation process. So I want to make sure you all are able to see that, because on the back end, you don't see a lot of that stuff as we do our annual evaluations, but we do have things in place that we can utilize as tools for that merit-based or performance pay standard. The last item, second to last item would be contributions towards retirement are provided by the town already at $20 a pay period. Well, I start kind of asking around, well, when did we start giving employees $20 a pay period? And I have every bit to guess that that's probably been more than a decade since that number was established. That's $520 a year, 26 pay periods. So that is a supplemental, benefit to our employees, but that $20 has not been adjusted based on the value of the dollar today. So what we did was we looked at, okay, well, what's $20 worth today? And it's about $26 and some change. And I would recommend that we move towards looking at that figure and we can then adjust that annually, which is going to be a very minimal adjustment every year. On top of that, there's also consideration for additional 1% contribution that the town would make based on an employee match and 1% of their salary. So we also did calculations, and actually 80 some of our employees are already making contributions into their 401k out of their own money, which is a good thing. Employees are trying to save towards retirement. But just wanted to let you know what those figures kind of looked at, because our initial thought was, how many employees are going above that $20 in contribution to 401k. My initial assumption was that probably not many employees are, because it's tough day to day, paycheck to paycheck, to commit that extra dollar. So I was actually very pleased to see that we have more than 80% of our employees that are actually contributing above and beyond that $20. And then the final consideration that we haven't really talked about a whole lot, but it is the reality in which we are seeing with recruitment, especially for part-time seasonal and part-time permanent positions, is that setting a minimum wage standard is not going to get employees, as we see what our competition for those types of positions are within our market. So we are competing, in my opinion, outside of just the local government realm, but with private businesses, private contractors or whatever to try and get this seasonal help, where somebody can go do a menial task and earn more than what the town has traditionally been able to pay. So there are some tools out there that we can look at, and one that was developed by MIT, which is a living wage calculator, and that can be drilled down to the county level specific. And for Pender County, I just pulled that is $13.34 an hour. It fluctuates in Onslow County, so we may look at, if this is something council would consider, but maybe averaging the two or whatever to set that living wage standard for part-time seasonal positions, so that we are in a better opportunity to recruit employees. I'll use the after-school program. We had to make an adjustment because we were losing 4 employees to other positions. They weren't going into local government to do this. They were going to leave the organization, and we were going to have to shut down a program that was successful in our community. So that is something that I wanted to bring to council's attention, because whether we talked about it in this pay study, we were going to talk about it in the budget process to try and advertise positions at a higher market rate for this living wage standard. So all that, we wanted to do a comprehensive review, not just look at the positions in which Mr. Hill applied and looking at that spreadsheet, but if we're opening the book, these are all the pages that I felt that we could look at, and I certainly would look towards council to provide some direction with this. My recommendation was going to be based on that 10% maximum threshold, and as we move through the budget process, if I can at least plan for a number, and I don't have to have your commitment today by any means, but if we can at least plan for a number, then we can, Dave and I can start backing down the budget, because as you know, that's how we have to prepare that. Just like if there were any other unforeseen expenses coming up next year, we're going to have to make it work. So more than happy to answer any questions. There's still some work to do on our part, but I'd love to hear input so that we can have direction moving forward on any of these points. Whether you can just tell me you don't like longevity and we won't pursue that, or you think it's too much. We tried to put some cost figures in there so that you can take a look at that.
So we need to pretty much decide on this by March meeting, right?
So
that she could work on the budget.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, I'm looking for Dave. Dave, revenue projections, what do you think?
I want to get another month of data in, but sales tax is coming at a robust pace. It's around 295,000 higher year over year after looking at January to January. Property taxes were at 93.8% collection, which was higher than it was at this point in time last year. So things are looking positive. Occupancy tax, I believe, is up around, I know it doesn't impact our general fund budget, but it's an indication of the robust activity in the economy in the area. It's around, it's 440,000 higher year over year, looking at January to January. So the numbers are looking positive. But the main number to look at with the growth is the sales tax and of course the property taxes. I'm still waiting to get assessed values from Oslo County and Pender County to project what our property taxes are going to be next fiscal year. So once I get that data, I'll forward that on to Kyle. Yes, to answer the question, sales revenues are looking strong. So when I start projecting for after getting in February's numbers, I'll start working my projections. And based on what we have right now, we're seeing some robust growth so far this fiscal year, which would be an indication that we'll have positive growth for next fiscal year.
Could I interject just a little bit right here?
Yeah.
We've done a lot of pay studies, and we know we've got great employees that do a fantastic job. And looking at this, I think need a little bit more detail and a little more information, Kyle, coming from you as to what it's going to look like dollar and cents wise for the options that do. I think a 10% thing would be good to look at as a starting point. And you can always back it back down. But to give and looking at the cost of it, I think and I'm speaking to my fellow council members here, we need to look at it from either a one-time implementation cost-wise or split it up into 2 years. And here's my problem with splitting it up in 2 years. Our employees, who you're going to choose or what you're going to choose and what program you're going to choose to start it with. We should treat them all the same. So what this means to us, in my estimation, we may not have as much money to go back into our undesignated fund that we need to have. And it may be a little low, and that's something that we could understand and be able to explain why we've dropped below 70% when we're trying to hold 75% in our undesignated funds. But I think when you look at the gravity of this, what we're fixing to do and what we should do for our employees and for the town of Surf City and to keep our services going, I think again here what Kyle brings back the options and saying here's what it is, here's the dollar and cents amount basically attached to it, give or take a few thousand here and there, then that gives us something concrete to look on and then pass and move forward with implementing a longevity, which I think is important as well. I think the whole package here is important. We need to be able to retain people that's doing a great job, and we need to be able to recognize those people differently that's doing a great job. And those that's just coming to work, to be coming to work, we need to be able to let that show for itself as well. So I'm in agreement with all this, but I just think we need to get some more information, give you time to get it to us, and show us the dollar and cents so we can make our decision on it.
I'm in agreement with Buddy. And I like your option 3B. And that includes in that the longevity and everything else. And that's something we definitely need to do, the longevity. And like me and you talked before, a person that's been here 7, 8 years and his salary has stayed stagnant, and then you got a new employee that comes in that's making basically what he's making or more. I don't like that because when certain people are at certain, they can do, there's a difference in people's as far as what they're capable of doing, and you don't penalize these people because of that. And you've got to understand, and that's one of the things, the longevity would help us on that, that phase of it. And I realize that we can't give 7% as far as that. The budget is concerned, as far as the difference, we had what, 1.7 in that inflation, and we can't give 7, but we need to kind of keep up. I ain't saying we got to give 7, but the town's sitting here looking at inflation also, but these people have to live, and if we're going to retain them, we've got to pay them accordingly. And the longevity and them putting the 1% in their salary over and above that, they're looking for the future, and that means a lot. And I like 3B. But that's going to be up to you and Dave to figure out if that's retainable.
Just want to say something. Retention, competitive, raises, incentives, rewards. Everybody said the same thing. And I think the mayor, I think every one of us here agree that it's cheap. It's definitely saves us money by giving raises, because looking for new employees is expensive. And I think incentives are critical, and we are in a major competitive time for employees today in everything we do. And it is just the times we are in, so we've got to stay ahead of the curve. So I am in agreement with Councilman Fowler, Mr. Helms, the rest of these guys, that we need to move forward with making this happen. So.
Can we, Kyle, you can email this information out when you get it to us so we can look over it, and then can we not probably take it up in the March workshop?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the figures are pretty well set. That option 3B has looked at even carrying to July 1 and what we would look at forecasting out for what salary cost would be, bringing everybody to that market rate, and then having that 10% cap. We factored in longevity, factored in what that 401k adjustment would look like. But I will put that in a more linear fiscal sort of report and get that out to council so that, yes, you can look at that. And then, you know, of course, our March work session, our departments will be presenting their line item budgets. And, you know, like I mentioned very early on in this presentation, is that it's going to be a balance, because We can't have everything, but this we know has been set as a priority for us to look at, and absolutely, we're going to do everything we can to try and implement this to the best of our ability financially, but also trying to meet the needs of our citizens through other services that are competing with importance and priority for the town. So that's what we're here to do, and I just appreciate council's feedback, certainly giving us direction to move forward with this project and getting this done for the town.
Yeah, and I don't want to do it on 2 years. We need
10-4.
to do it.
Okay.
I don't want to take 2 years to do this, split it.
All right, so you're gonna use this breakdown,
Yes, sir.
then add the rest of the stuff to it.
We will get everything as comprehensive as we possibly can,
So
and
that's gonna be a little more than this 348.
yeah, that was and that was shared with the pay study option document. So that includes the option 3B, and then there's a 401k 457, a longevity pay, and then total funds. With those two things, were about 95,000. But yeah, I'll break that down even further and send it over to you.
About 450.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
If you have any questions, either Kyle or Lydia can get those to me, and
Yeah.
I'll provide any information you need. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, appreciate it.
And just I wanted to thank Councilman Helms for listening to me and trying to explain all this stuff, through his liaison role. So I do appreciate that. It's very helpful for us. So.
All right, parking capacity analysis overview, you wanna go to that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. We've got our consultant here that completed our parking capacity analysis. So Mr. Dave Burr and Ms. Wanda Norman over here with Rich and Associates. And as we had talked about during some other planning sessions, was that implementing parking management within town was going to come with several challenges. And one of the concerns that we had by going to the structured process was, the elimination of a lot of parking, and that typically came through on-street right-of-way parking. And we all understand, the chaos, havoc that was occurring certainly during peak season for our beachgoers. So we implemented the parking management, paid parking process, had very structured parking areas, and then had a total number of parking available to the public. But then that is also supplemented through private parking opportunities that I'm sure Mr. Burr will talk about. So basically what we wanted to do was, where are we at right now with our capacity? Can we meet the demand of individuals within our local area, within our region? As we understand our text to park figures, folks are coming here from the Triangle, from the Charlotte area to utilize that text to park. And when I look at text to park figures, I make a basic assumption that those are a lot of our day trippers that are coming to the beach. So again, the overall purpose of this project was to look at potential strategies that we can implement short-term, mid-term, and long-term, so that we can try and keep up with the demand, because it's council's vision to be open to folks who want to come to the beach, and it's our role to try to make that happen. So I'll turn it over to Dave after that long-winded introduction and let you go through that study. So.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Members of council, good morning. As Mr. Brewer mentioned, our task was a parking capacity analysis, and that was to assess the current and the future parking demand for Surf City. We, as part of that, we wanted to inventory the public parking, but we wanted to inventory the private parking as well. We wanted to understand what that demand was coming down to use those parking facilities, determine was there a need for additional parking, and what were some of the financial implications of implementing additional parking. The methodology that we employed was we were down here in September and we inventoried all the on-street, off-street, public and private supply within the downtown, and then as well as the town parking supply up and down the beach that you have available as near the beach access points. We interviewed a number of stakeholders. We had an online survey that we put out to the business community to get some information from them. We did on Saturday, September 25th, we did what we call an occupancy count, where between 10 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening, we actually counted how full each of the parking areas were, both within the downtown, public and private, and up and down the beach, so we'd have a benchmark of what was actually being used. And we used that information in order to create a model, understanding that when we did this in September, that's not during your peak season, so we had to correct for that. The parking supply, as I mentioned, was classified public and private. On this map here, the areas that are in dark blue are the publicly available parking. I think there's an area in pink, which is 2-hour parking. It's generally along the right-of-ways. And then the green is the private supply within the downtown. And then going up Roland Avenue, most of that supply there is privately controlled, although on the on-street you have 2-hour parking. Now, the parking supply that you have within the downtown totals, I believe it's just under 1,500 spaces. Am I reading that? And only about a third of that is publicly available. Normally, a recommendation that we make is a municipality should control about 50% of the parking. You only control about a third. And what that 50% does, it just facilitates people able to park once and walk to multiple destinations. Now, one of the unique conditions that you have here is most of that public supply that you're using, we attribute that, most of that are beachgoers. Simply because of the other charge for parking. If I'm going to a private business or a restaurant, more than likely, if they have parking, that's where I'm going to park because that's going to be free. The problem that you have is when that parking is private, with that business owner, they don't want you parking there and then going someplace else. That's for my next customer. So come in, have a bite to eat. When you're ready, don't go visit the beach. Get in your car and move it. If you're coming to a shop, fine, come in, shop. When you're done, get in your car if you're going to another destination and leave that available for my next customer. So that's why we think, you're a little below what the benchmark for the amount of parking that you are providing that is publicly available. But again, most of what is being used by beachgoers. And the question is, are they or are they not then using services downtown, which is what we would want them to do, obviously. If they're coming in, enjoying the beach, and really not spending money in your town, that's where we would probably like to disperse them other places along the beach and save those spaces available for the customers who are going to do both. This is just an example of the information from the occupancy counts. As it says, we broke this out into the publicly available spaces, and we did count at 10 to 12, 12 to 2, 2 to 4, and 4 to 6. And as you see, we counted about 414 spaces of about, I think there's 454 publicly available. So we got about 95% of the parking supply that we actually inventoried. And then we did the same thing, the private supply. These are all the various parking areas that are associated with private businesses. And there I did, again, got a high proportion of the spaces that we physically observed during each of these times to get what their occupancy was. Now, as I mentioned, we did this count in Saturday, September 25th, which is obviously below your peak season, but we did get information from Pivot, who were able to provide to us a number of text-to-park transactions on that day, and it was 561. What we then did is, I'll come back to that in a moment, but this is looking at the occupancy on that date. The areas in blue are the areas less than 50%. In green, it's 50 to 75, 75 to 90 is in yellow, and then 90 and above is in red. And you see during the first circuit, we get to 10 o'clock or 12 o'clock. We get in the 12 to 2 period, or is that the 2 to 4 period. You see those areas along the beach, many of those are above 90% occupied. And then the 4 to 6. And then we did this just taking a look at these are just the public parking areas. We pulled out the private supply. So if you look at that, this is the 12 to 2, 2 to 4. And you see it's over by Kinston and the areas along the beach that are the heavy utilized parking areas. And then the 4 to 6. Now, as I mentioned, what we did with this information was we used this to build a model. We looked at the 561 cars, we looked at the occupancy in the private parking areas, we looked at the square footage of those areas, and we created what we call a parking generation rate to relate to what we were seeing. And that parking generation rate is along the top for each of those various categories. And this is during the peak time on this Saturday observation date. And we then compare that calculated demand for those private parking areas to the private parking supply. And you see on most blocks, there's surplus capacity. There's 2 blocks where you have small deficits where the private supply cannot accommodate the private demand on that block. And what that means is they are either going to private supply on an adjacent block, and I'll talk about that in a moment, or those folks, you know, that would be demand that has to be using public supply that's competing with beachgoers. That's what they would have to use. So as I mentioned, the model that we created, we looked at the private and the public supply, and the columns in pink represent the public supply. And we looked at what our model did in terms of calculating what that public need is, and you see it hits those 4 points relatively well. When we add in the private supply, which is in the blue line, and then we total those, again, the model is hitting those 4 points pretty accurately. So that tells us the length of stay that we got from the pivot data and the model that we created is actually pretty good in correlating to what we're actually seeing. And that was important because what we wanted to do was be able to project, obviously, during a higher time during the year. So the information that Pivot provided us, July was your peak month. You did about 17,000 transactions that month. And if you look at what that did, just graphically, peaking at that month and then starting to fall off. So by the time we were getting in September, we were getting below that. But when we were here in September, we asked for, okay, for peak month, give us 2 weeks of peak days of traffic. And so that's the graph that you see here. And we see on 2 days, we hit over 1,000 cars a day using the text-to-park transaction. Your average for that 2-week period, and again, this is during your peak month, was about 500. But we had some days that we hit over 1,000. And actually, the year-end data, there were a number of days in several months and other days during the month that you're well over 800 cars a day that you were hitting. So we used that 1,008 cars a day and applied that to our model, did the same thing going back and calculated what does that need on a private supply and what does that need on the publicly available parking. And you see on the private here, we've got a few more blocks that are in a deficit condition. As we get, our assumption is as we have more traffic coming down to the beach using more of those text-to-park transactions, there's also going to be some more people coming down for the restaurants, for the shops, and those kinds of things as well. They're not going to stay static at what we saw at the 500. That's going to go up as well. So that's what this is reflecting. And so we took our model and we projected at 1,008 cars a day, what would we expect those parking areas to look like? And again, we went through and we said, you know, if it was a popular at 500 and there's more traffic down here, it's going to be popular again. And so we distributed the parking. And you see what that looks like. The 12 to 2, a lot of red in the public parking areas. 2 to 4, a lot of red. And even late in the day, there's a lot of red utilization, your capacity on those days. Now, again, you're not going to hit that every day, but as the region grows, you're probably going to hit that more frequently. You hit it 2 days during the 2-week period in July. There were days throughout the year that you hit it, and you're liable to hit that more often. So with that, if you're hitting that kind of traffic, and again, what we were looking at was a parking capacity analysis, what could you do? One of the popular lots was our popular locations. As you saw, it was red a good part of the time, was the lot at Kinston Avenue there. It basically operates as 3 separate parking areas, the way it's defined. And Mr. Brewer asked us to look and see, is there anything we could do to improve the capacity of that? So we took that to one of my architects, and he laid out, if we made that one large lot, the capacity of the 3 lots individually is about 74 spaces. If we were to redesign this, we'd have about 132. We'd pick up 58 spaces. And that would be at a relatively low cost. We're not talking about asphalting or anything. It's basically pulling out some of those barriers between the lots, relaying it out so it's more efficient. And there's 58 cars. That's about 10% of what your capacity is right now, more than 10%. Another one of the issues that we were asked to look at was could that site accommodate a parking garage? And I do want to caution, we are not recommending a parking garage at this time. The question was, is capacity analysis, could you do something like that? Again, I went to my architect, he looked at that site, could you do that? Laid out a scheme here. It would, typical floor would be about 90 cars. And I don't know if you can tell from this, but what that would be is it's what we call a slope. Both sides of the garage have slope floors so that you are climbing up. You're climbing up one full circuit or one full floor with circuit, but both floors are sloped. That garage, and again, this is one of the reasons we're not recommending this at this point. Garages are not inexpensive buildings. So a lot of people, it's like, well, just build a parking garage. You don't understand. They are not cheap buildings. My architects tell me right now, construction cost is about $25,000 a space. There's a number of other costs associated with that. The figures that we have here, we assume this, assuming a parking revenue bond, which means the parking revenues are designed to pay it back as opposed to a general obligation bond. So there are some costs associated with that. We assume this on a 25-year, 4% revenue bond. The debt service on that is over $600,000 a year. And again, this is just something, at some point down the road, council may want to consider doing this. You can put a garage there. It would fit, but it would take certainly a fair amount of funds to do that. Now, another one of the things that we looked at, particularly with this long-term need for parking, your parking revenues, again, what those were generating, and the text to park, about $700,000 a year. And we looked at and there were some things that Pivot suggested could be done. And so what we wanted to do was, okay, they're suggesting some things. How much revenue could that generate for the system that you might be able to put towards putting money aside for a parking facility or additional parking, whether that's surface lot or what have you in the future. So the first option was to extend the parking an additional hour. Right now it goes from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., extend that to 6. And we have calculated what that additional revenue would be depending on how much of your revenue is generated in the downtown and how much is dispersed on the beach. So there's some additional revenue there. Another option that was suggested was extend the season by 1 month, go to March 1st. And we could generate additional revenue from that. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. So there's additional revenue that could be generated by starting the season March 1st. And that's holding everything the same length of stay and everything that we have today. It's just we have a month of additional operation. And if we did both of those, we would generate between $140,000 and $170,000 in additional revenue doing both of those. Another option suggested was to increase premium parking. And again, that serves a couple of purposes. One is it obviously increases revenue, but it's premium parking, it's the parking most proximate to the beach. And if you have lower rates in more dispersed parking, what's going to happen is those folks are going to disperse to some of that underutilized parking, which we found during our occupancy counts. There were parking areas down the beach that were not nearly as heavily utilized as what we saw on the Saturday that we were here, and that we would expect would be even more full on a busier day. So if we charge a premium there, we're dispersing that to some folks, to some of those other parking locations. And so that's one option to help with that. If we did that in combination with the 1 hour of additional parking and extending the month, then we would generate additional revenue here. And then the last option is if we add the additional 58 spaces, obviously we can generate some additional revenue from that. And if we did that in combination with all the other options, we'd be generating about $500,000 in additional revenue. Now, with that, there's a couple of other recommendations that, these are the ones that we talked about, adding the season. We think, that is, something easy to do, extending the hour, again, additional revenue, extending the season, adding the additional 58 spaces, and increasing the premium parking. Other recommendations, though, and again, these are to help the capacity analysis, has to do with signage. It's directing people to where the parking is available. As Mr. Burr mentioned in the opening, you have a lot of day trippers who may not be familiar with coming into Surf City. They see a parking area, they may park there. The other thing is they may be parking in a private area, not realizing that that is public. So what we want to do is make sure that the public areas are clearly identified as public parking, and not put the onus on these private parking operators or private parking owners to have to keep chasing people out of their lots. That's for their customer. They see someone pulling in, they're getting out the beach chair and saying, "Oh, they ain't coming to my restaurant." We don't want them to have to be, doing that. So let's make sure that we identify the public parking areas, and when they get there, they understand that it's paid parking. This slide is just showing, I don't know if you can see it, but it's showing a directional sign. It's pointing to where the public parking is available. And then once you get there, you have an identification sign. One of the things that what this slide is showing is when I get to some of these public parking areas along the beach, it identifies it's public parking there. What happens if I get there and it's full? Well, there's a sign there saying there's additional public parking down the beach and directs you to that. And again, the idea is to be able to navigate folks to the public parking. If that's not available, where is there additional public parking?
Premium downtown park, are you still allowed to take the day in park?
Yes, it's taking that. It's $5 an hour. I think it's $20 a day now. You'd probably up that to maybe $25, $23, some number. But it is increasing that rate proportionately. We didn't work the numbers out. We worked out what that $5 was. So the other question that came up is the season pass. You sold a number of those, and I don't have the figures in front of me. Whether that should be eliminated. We think you would still have that. Some of the complaints that we heard is if you have someone that they buy a season pass late in the year, it still costs that same amount of money. We think at some point, maybe you start prorate that. And then after, I think, July, season pass for most people doesn't really make any sense. You'd have to be down here an awful lot where it's just probably cheaper for you to just pay the daily rate. So at some point, you would probably want to cut those off.
You do suggest prorating.
Prorating it, maybe for, you would have the pass at the season pass rate, maybe through May, and then maybe June and July, it's prorated, to a lower rate, and then after July, it really doesn't make any sense to do that. For most people, I think they would find that it's probably just, if I pay the daily rate, I'm going to save less than
Right.
even the $100 or $250, whatever it is. So, another one of the things, Pivot does they did a really good job in managing the system this year. From we heard they were implemented, very few complaints. I mean, to go from no paid parking to paid parking and to be accepted as it was is a testament, to the good job that they did. But one of the things that we also looked at is, there's enforcement, which they are doing. And, a lot of people, they don't understand, that enforcement, it is a necessity in a well-run parking system. I've worked in communities where there is no enforcement and it is chaos because you'll have people parking, it's basically wherever they want. So the purpose of enforcement is you've got to be writing the tickets. You've got to be collecting the tickets. And if you're missing any of those, people are just going to ignore the rules. And so one of the things that, the citations have to be a rate that's a little more than a mosquito bite to someone, because if it's, $3 or $5, it's going to be, okay, no big deal. Yours are significant enough, to get people to follow the rules, which is what we want. But the other thing that citations should do is you want to encourage folks to pay those in a timely fashion. If they get delayed too long, then that involves the court system or the state in order to collect, revenues that are owed you. So here we're recommending that the citations, if they're paid within a timely fashion, fine. If they're not paid within a certain number of time, the fines escalate, and perhaps escalate again before you have to involve the state or the court system. And then the last thing, resident parking, again, there was a suggestion in the Pivot report on the resident parking. We like the idea that residents are given the free passes for parking. They get 2 free passes. They can buy additional passes at an additional cost, but that's limited, and we agree with that. There may be very limited reasons why they would have to have, more than 4 passes, and those would have to be either through Mr. Brewer or his designee to, we approve those, but it's not going to be an automatic approval. And then lastly, one of the things that was suggested is, do we want to limit, if you have a resident pass, you don't get to park in our premium spaces downtown, you're going to have to park in a certain area. We don't agree with that. We don't want to diminish the value of those resident passes. They should be able to park in any of those areas. And again, we think most of those, those folks are going to be familiar enough. They're going to know the areas down the beach where they can park and not have so much hassle as opposed to competing within the downtown. But, we think that we don't want to diminish the value of that. So that's basically the capacity analysis. And if there's any additional questions, I'll be happy to take those.
I like some of
Good.
your recommendations. Some of your recommendations I don't.
I'm sorry?
Do what?
So I like some of your recommendations. Some of the recommendations I don't particularly like. But I think it's a good report, and it's something we can look at and do. I like the recommendation of extending it a month, redoing the parking lot. I don't want to, and doing the June, not doing the prorated. I think that gets into a lot of paperwork and other stuff as well. But if we cut it off either June 15th or June the 30th and say there's no more season passes sold over that date, I think that would be good. and doing the progressive fines. If you don't pay by the 15th, it increases $10 to 30th. I think that's good as well. And doing a parking deck, we have to deal with stormwater runoff, and that creates another problem. And not only that, you got the aesthetics of the town, and as well as your neighbors there to think of. Those are the only recommendations I had any hesitation about, but the other I think are good and can be done. And the premium parking, I think, is a plus. But I do thank you for your report.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I say I like most of the recommendations. I think we'll see a big difference by charging a premium price for downtown or in-town parking, and then lower price, because our outlying parking spots were being used very little. And so this will help increase the use on them, because if they're just coming to the beach and just going to go over and go to the beach, then they could park down there. But if they come in town and they see these parking spaces here, they're going to park there if there's no difference in the price. So I think that'll help a lot, and that'll give us, it'll actually be like adding parking spaces.
Right. Right.
Now, the prorating, the season pass, I think I brought this to your attention the other day. I've had quite a few people that have asked me about it, because, they come in May or something and buy a parking season pass and pay the same thing. So, they want to know why there's no prorating on that. I think we need to look at it and see what we could do on that. But now you all would handle that, right?
No, that's handled through your contractor, Pivot Parking.
Right, okay, Pivot Parking.
So
Have
if-
you talked to Pivot about it?
Yeah, I thought, and I just don't recall off the top of my head, I think we talked about this during our retreat when they gave their end of season report
Yeah.
with their recommendations. I can go back to it, but if that's something council wants to look at, we certainly can do that. And we would just adjust that through our own fee schedule and then ask them to apply through their
Well, I
online
had not
purchase.
heard much about it, until the last few months. I guess people were getting to thinking about, paying again this year. So I think it's something we need to look at.
Yeah.
And just, see. And see how much trouble it would be for Pivot.
Well, and I think, again, we've got fantastic data to show. I mean, I can't say how much I appreciate all the information and data that we have received over just 1 year of parking.
Right, I know.
And that can really help guide our decision making moving forward with things. But I'll look at what the percentage of parking time-wise available
Right,
July
when-
1 through the end of season, and see if we can have what in my mind, what I would see is a step system throughout the months remaining from July 1, August 1, September 1, and then October 1. If somebody wants to do fish every day in October, they might still want to buy a season pass if it's prorated enough.
Right.
So we'll look at that, and
Okay.
we can bring that through the budget process and
All right.
potentially implement a different fee schedule.
I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
But, I think we'll see a big difference with redesigning the parking lots. And then we've added some new lots. So, I think that'll make a big difference in our income this year. Especially it's unbelievable how much an hour of parking adds. Of course, it's an hour of prime time too, so.
So, and Chris, I don't know if Chris is here, but we've already talked, Chris and his crew, we already have the parking bumpers in stock, which is good from last year. So they're going to be working as hard as they can to get that redesigned. We probably got to talk to Price a little bit about some utility stuff out from the old building, but yeah, that's something that we can do in-house, and it'll still be a gravel lot. And the only change that I saw from their recommendation is we can potentially eliminate one of the access points on Kinston Avenue and then open up the access point on South Topsail, south of the IGA, so that you can have a better flow within town without having to get into the roundabout
Yeah,
to be able to move that traffic circulation. But, maybe that's something we ask our TRC to evaluate and see if that's something that would work. I tend to think it would help our flow. We would lose a couple spots where we open it up at South Topsail, but we could gain those by eliminating one of the driveways on Kinston, since that is a one-way street now. So.
yeah. But it adds how many? 58?
58.
Yeah, it's 58. And
That's,
I did ask my architect, it's basically a wash, that you would close off the one entrance and open up that off by the IGA there.
Okay.
It's the same 58.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
We don't need to do anything right now, do we?
No, sir, Mr. Mayor, and I'm pleased to report that a lot of the recommendations that are consistent with Pivot, consistent with this study have already been implemented. The fine escalation, the premium parking, those have already been put into effect for this upcoming parking season. So, the things that I look at is the individual text to park signs were increased in their size, so it is going to be easier for people to see those. But as we continuously talked about last year, and what we should be implementing this year is that process in which if somebody goes to a lot and it's full, then they can have some direction to move on to the next one and have a general idea. Because as much as we would love people to get on the app or get on the website to find a parking map, if they're not doing that before they leave their house, it becomes very difficult in a crowded environment for somebody to get on their phone and try and seek these additional parking areas.
Yeah,
So-
somebody else is blowing their horn for them to move while they're,
Absolutely, yeah.
while they're trying to look at
And
the
probably
app.
some other more derogatory things,
Yeah.
but so those are some of the other things that I think we can work on, and having a goal set for our true peak parking season, which starts to come in June and July, to try to have a majority of these things implemented. So no, council, you do not need to do anything.
Okay.
But we appreciate Dave, of course, for your
Thank
work.
you.
Thank you.
All right. And right away, uh-oh.
All right, Mr. Mayor.
Are you folks ready?
I'll somewhat introduce the item, but I think you've got a good crew over there that has been intimately involved in sort of trying to set some policy based on priorities for council and how we want to move forward, if we want to move forward based on that direction. And really, is staff going to get moving on this project? So we want to give to you what our thoughts are as to how this may be palatable, but really are going to really need your direction on the program in its entirety. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Kimes. She's here with Mr. Scott Hitchings, our code enforcement officer, who certainly would be tasked with a good lion's share of this work. But Ms. Kimes, if you want to take it from here.
Let me get my microphone right. Good morning. As Kyle mentioned, we're here to talk about right-of-way clearing. So based on your goals and objectives from the last couple of council retreats, staff was tasked with coming up with a process to work through this right-of-way issue that is really a town-wide issue, especially on the island, but is a town-wide issue. During the original PowerPoint presentation, which was last summer, we discussed the need of the right-of-way clearing with the AMI project and the utilities, and then the reasons that from a street side, we would need the right-of-way clearing project and how these projects could work together. At this presentation, you requested that we put together this policy. The policy is in your packet for you to read through. Today, Scott and I are going to highlight a few things in the packet just to kind of talk about where we are in the process, what our thoughts are on how to make this happen, and kind of some pictures that show what does this actually look like for the town of Surf City. So this first slide is straight from the original presentation that we gave you. It is just a slide showing kind of what the right-of-way is. So as we've discussed on multiple occasions, the public's perception is not that their property ends at the property line, which is clearly marked by this black line around each house, but that their property actually ends at the edge of pavement. So everything between their property line and the edge of pavement in this hashed area, the majority of people think of as their yard, which is what has created some of this right-of-way issue. So some of the reasons that we as the town would like to clear these right-of-ways is to maintain the site triangles and clear recovery zones. And as we talked about, the clear recovery zones are, if I, accidentally veer off the road a little bit, they're based on your speed, there's different widths that you can reasonably recover your car without hitting something. Those tend to be, with the speeds on the island or whatnot, they tend to be anywhere from 8 to 10 feet. And basically all of our subdivisions off island are those lower speeds as well. So that clear recovery zone is going to be that 8 to 10 feet. Pedestrian access is a major thing on the island as we're working to fill in those gaps of sidewalk in the central business district and really everywhere on the island that, would get everybody to beach accesses. People are currently walking in the road. A lot of that walking in the road is because you can't walk on the shoulder because there's so many obstacles walking on the shoulder. And then we have more chance for pedestrian vehicular interactions, which is never a good thing. Also, emergency vehicle clearance. I know I was driving home one day last summer and the ambulance was parked in the middle of South Shore because he couldn't get off the road anywhere. So you've got an ambulance parked in the middle of the road with fire and police out there, trying to direct traffic. They're pulled over as far as they can get, but you're in a one-lane situation where if we had these right-of-way areas, we could get these emergency vehicles off, which also limits the chance of any of our officer, or decreases the amount of time that an officer or a firefighter or an EM person is in the road where they could be hit by a passing vehicle who's so busy looking at the flashing lights or the police car that they miss the police officer or firefighter who's standing in the road in front of them. Street maintenance is an issue. Just being able to get our equipment off the road and maintain it. Scott and I are out on the island riding around a lot, and it's hard when you have a truck with a trailer and a mini excavator to get that equipment out of the road so that it doesn't get hit, or so that we don't have to go down to one-lane road situations, which then requires flaggers and additional personnel. If we had the areas off the edge of pavement, we could get this equipment off the road and maintain two-way traffic. And especially during the summer when we have an uh-oh with sewer and water where we have to get out and break something or fix something that is broken in the middle of summer, maintaining that free-flowing traffic, it really is a big deal. And then stormwater, as we all know, when it rains, it floods on the island. A lot of that is as roads age, the shoulders raise. So you have to go in and clip those shoulders periodically. But they also raise when people put boulders and flower beds and trees and all kinds of other obstacles. So if we can't maintain a shoulder that is at grade or lower than the grade of the road, then we can't maintain positive drainage. We can't maintain positive drainage, our streets deteriorate at a much quicker rate, which causes an increase to that bottom line that we've been talking about today. How do we maintain our budget in an ever-changing climate? And then finally, of course, as we've already discussed kind of on some of the other points, is that access to our utility assets. All of our utility assets are in the shoulders or under the roadway. Anything that's underground requires significant access. We have sand out here on the beach. We can't just dig down like we can in clay. We have to lay those slopes back. So every hole that we dig is wider than what it would typically be in an area that has a different soil type. So these are all things that, you know, come into play when we're looking at our right-of-ways and maintaining them in a clear, manageable way. So some of the key policy points on the enforcement approach. So we've had multiple meetings about this. We've all tossed this around. I asked Scott to kind of sit down and write out everything. So he did a really good job sitting down and taking all of the conversations and viewpoints that came from those meetings and putting it into one document. So one of the things that really came out of that meeting is, what is our end goal? What is most important? So from our standpoint, doing it that 8 to 10 foot first is our main goal. Having the whole right-of-way cleared is the town ordinance. It is the ultimate goal. But meeting some of these safety features quicker is our main goal. So we have proposed a phased approach. There are three different phases in this approach. In the first phase, the collector streets would have a 10-foot cleared area, and the local streets would have an 8-foot cleared area. Remember, we did the pavement condition survey a while back. From that, we used the collector streets as determined in that, so we have a document to go back to. But our collector streets are going to be like South Topsail, North New River, South Shore, North Shore? South Shore.
South Shore, not North.
Not North Shore. Little
Kinston.
Little Kinston, and then 5210. So basically your big roads that everybody's driving on, your side streets, your subdivisions, all of those are going to be our local streets. So on your collector street, you're going to go 10 feet from the edge of pavement. So we're not even going to talk about the property line at this point partially. Property lines out here, let me just start with property lines out here and road widths vary from 29.5 feet to 100 feet. So if the right-of-way is only 29.5 feet, then the right-of-way matters, because 8 feet off of each side of a 20-foot pavement is 36 feet, which is obviously wider than our 29.5 feet. But on anything that is wider than 36 feet, which is the majority of our roads out here, we're not quite going to reach the property line in this first approach. In phase 1, we'll be looking at the posts, the stakes, the poles, the ropes, the fences, anything that was a lower financial investment and can be removed quickly and easily. So it gives people a chance to get these things out in a rather quick manner. It's something that if we have to do it, or if we have to have it contracted out, that can be done quickly. It's also part of the majority of things that are in our way. So it cleans up the majority of things. This would be a town-wide thing and not necessarily by our zones, where we send out the letters explain this is our process. We are in the beginning of phase 1, and then as the next phases come along, we will, reach back out. Phase 2 goes into really removing the landscaping timbers, the shrubs, the rocks, the unprotected trees. So this allows people a little bit more time. So if they want to move that rose bush that their grandma planted, when they got the house in 1962 up to the house, then they have time to move that. They have time to do those things. So that would be phase 2. It is by zones. There is a zone map in your packet today. And if y'all want to talk about that a little bit later, we can kind of talk through the zones or whatnot. Scott and I had a lot of discussion about the zones and how to lay them out. The heaviest pedestrian vehicle conflict area is going to be near the downtown area. So the way that Scott and I looked at it was starting in that downtown area, working our way out on the island, especially based on where public parking and public accesses are, so that we can keep people out of the roadway as much as possible. And then once we finish the island, move into the mainland and going over there. Luckily, on the mainland, we do have a lot of active homeowners associations, and the homeowners associations do help manage a lot of these items, which is why we typically spend more enforcement time on the island than off island. So that would be phase 2. Phase 3 is the entire right-of-way width, which would be everything. we would have to determine the right-of-way and go out and look at it and say, everything is there. Now, when we do the phase 1 and 2 approach, we will say you can't put it back in the right-of-way. You can't just move it to 8 foot because we are coming back. If it's removed, it can't just go back into the right-of-way. You have to move it onto your property. We don't want people moving things from 2 foot off the edge of pavement to 8 foot off the edge of pavement and then to the right-of-way. We want them to go ahead and move it completely as we go through. There are a few exemptions that we put in this packet. One of the most significant features of the island is our coastal forests. They have been, we're constantly tearing them down to build houses. We don't want to, as the town, to go out and just start wiping out these old live oaks that have been here for years that help hold this island together. So the Coastal Forest Overlay District clearly delineates which trees are protected as far as caliper and whatnot, and allows those trees to be protected. So we looked at that as trees that could be protected. And I do have some pictures a little bit farther in that'll kind of show everything that I'm talking about. On the landscaping, we're not saying you can't have grass. We're not saying you can't have mulch by the edge of the road. We're not saying you can't have walkable things. But we are saying that if you do have something in the right-of-way, it's got to be graded away from the road. It can't be higher than the road. It can't be graded to drain towards the road. It's got to be graded to drain away from the road, and it needs to be at a slope, if possible, that allows people, to walk across it. Now, I know on the ocean front, some of those lots go way up on the dune, and even in some of the island neighborhoods that are on the secondary dunes, on the backside of 50 or 210, there are areas that's just not something we can do. We're not going to go change these massive slopes on dunes. But if you're in a flat area, you need to grade to drain away from the road so that we're not creating those continuous stormwater problems. Mailboxes are already exempt within our ordinances, and then existing beach access crossovers that are there and have been historically there, we will not be removing beach access crossovers. Or at least it is not our intent to do that. If we are told to, we will do that. So what does this look like for us? We talk about where's the property line, what are we actually doing, what are we actually taking? So we went out, Aaron with police department was nice enough to take a nice updated couple of photos for me. So if you see on the right of the screen is the photo that Aaron took last week. So that shows the conditions of the street, a week ago. On the left-hand side of your screen, Rocco, our GIS technician, went in and drew out for me to show what is that area, where is it. So if you look on there, you can see that South Shore is the asphalt-colored gray in the center. Then you have the utility strip, the devil strip, whatever you want to call it, that strip of grass between the asphalt and the sidewalk. And Scott actually went out and measured these. So these are true measurements from this section of South Shore. And then you had the walkway, and then we show a 5-foot clear zone behind the walkway. That is something that could potentially be adjusted if council feels that is too far out. But we would ask for at least a minimum of 2 feet, and that is a standard for multi-use paths and walkways, so that if I'm walking on the edge, my shoulder doesn't bump something. If I'm riding my bicycle, my arms are out a little bit farther, I don't hit a mailbox and wreck because I'm passing Scott and he scares me and I'm on the very edge of the pathway. So this is just kind of an idea. You can see that on the top of your screen, in some areas, this almost touches the right-of-way lines, and in other areas, this doesn't. There's a couple of things about this picture. This is a generalization from Henry County GIS. This is not the exact location. We did not go out and find irons or corners for y'all, but this is kind of a generalization. Also note in the picture that Aaron took for us, you can clearly see the power lines. They're within the property lines. On South Shore, this is a common thing. So I know everybody goes, oh, go look at the power lines. The power lines are the right-of-way. On the island, the power lines are not the right-of-way. They are not the right-of-way more often probably than they are the right-of-way. We have found that our water meters, boxes tend to be more the right-of-way line than the power poles. So this one, I just wanted to give y'all a good illustration of what the 10-foot clear zone, which is the bottom side without a sidewalk, would look like. So you see there's additional room there between the property line and the clear zone. And then, on the top, you can see the, how much, it's about 3 extra feet or so wider when you look at it that way. So it does go a little bit closer to the property line or the house. So that's what a collector street would look like, or a street with sidewalk. Because with sidewalk, we would just go with that 5-foot minimum. So we do have sidewalk in our downtown area that may not be at the right of way. So it would look kind of like this top side. Some areas, the sidewalk is the back of the property line and the sidewalk butt up. So the edge of sidewalk would be as far as we would go. We would not clear any farther back than that. A lot of that is going to be in your business areas, and we are going to have the site plans for that shows where the location of the sidewalk is. So then we went up to the canals, and we went to 7th Street. Again, on the right is the picture that Aaron took for me. On the left is the overlay that Rocco created using Pender County GIS. We did the 8-foot clear zone, and as you can see, this has I believe it's a 60-foot right-of-way. On the canals, the poles actually are close to the right-of-way. So the canals are really a good one to look at because you can see the poles and you can clearly see everything that's within the right-of-way. But looking at this, there is a significant amount of property that would not be impacted in Phase 1, that could be impacted in Phase 2. And as you can see, there are palm trees that could be moved, or there are palms that could be moved in between the time that we start this and the time that we go in for full right-of-way enforcement, if that is the desire of the council. There's also a little bit of a flower bed that comes into that area as well that would need to be reworked or whatnot because it is within the right-of-way. So that's just kind of what it would look like on a local street that has a clear area, has a clearer right-of-way. And then we talked about that Coastal Forest Overlay District. So how does that look? What are we talking about? This picture was taken on Crutchfield. This person happens to have their stake nicely marked. So you can see between the power pole and the tree on your right, there's a little wooden stub with orange tape around it. That is the property line, and they actually have both corners. So I kind of lined up. That beautiful live oak right there is something that we would not remove at this time. The tree, the little sprig tree to the left of it, it may or may not, I didn't actually measure it, it may or may not meet the ordinance, so it may be required to be removed. On the left hand is another picture of a rather large oak that would be protected by the Coastal Forest Overlay District. In the policy, we did mention that the Coastal Forest Overlay District in no way protects a tree if we have a utility conflict, and that tree has to be removed for that utility conflict. We will do our best to keep them in, but if the tree grows into the sewer and the sewer line has to be fixed, then the sewer line has to be fixed and it will have to be removed. We also commented in there that some trimming or pruning may be required. Our thought process on that was fire chief has big trucks. So if there are some trees that we could maintain and just prune back, and that would provide him access still, then we would have that opportunity. On most of these side roads like this on the island that have this Coastal Forest Overlay area, the trees aren't right up against the road in such a manner that you couldn't get over. So I could drive right past a couple of these trees and pull over, and they could still come through with their emergency vehicles. There would still be potential for people to get off. There would still be potential for cars to get over if needed. So the other thing we looked at is how our current ordinance is written. How does it support this? It clearly says the street lines have to be cleared. But having a very active code enforcement over the past couple of years, when we traditionally have not had one, then we transitioned into the start of the program, and now I feel like we've kind of got it going pretty well. We've learned that people question everything. The words really have to make sense. The words have to make sense in a way that people understand, not necessarily a way that we understand. When people look at the word street lines, a lot of them think the white lines on the edge of the street, right? That's the lines on the street. If you go back to another chapter and read our definitions in section 3, and then you come back to chapter 16 and read the words, you find out that street lines are actually the right-of-way lines. So we have gone in, and everywhere there are street lines, we put right-of-way lines beside it. One of the reasons that we chose to do that is if you do happen to have a survey, right-of-way is written everywhere. Street lines is not a term used on any of the surveys that I've seen, but right-of-way is. So we've gone in and put that to try to help with some of the understanding of that. We've also gone in and cleaned up some of the language allowing the immediate removal of items in the clear zone, which is that 8 to 10 foot, without written notification. This process wouldn't go into effect until after we have finished that phase of the project. So we're not going to go out there tomorrow and just start yanking stuff up everywhere. But once we go through, everything is clean, and we have historical data that we are enforcing this. We have enforced it. We have enforced it fairly across the town. Then if Scott comes in and there is a fence that came up 6 inches across the road, or 6 inches from the asphalt that's a post and rope, then we can go ahead and remove it. We don't have to call and give them 30 days to think about it and whatnot. So that was added in there. We reduced the removal period from 30 to 15 days. It just kind of gets long and drug out. So it would give them, we give them the notification in the initial program, we give them 30 days. Once we've gone through and we've completed this program, everybody is aware of it. Everybody is aware that we are enforcing it. Then on their violation after completion of this program, they would only have 15 days to remove it, or to reach out to us and say, I've called my landscaper, he can't be here until 18 days from now. Yep, we can work with you on that. You have a plan, we know what you're doing. So those are the main changes that we've made to the ordinance. Mayor, did you have a question?
Yeah, okay, now, the 15 days is not from the time that they're notified that their right-of-way has to be cleaned up, right?
The 15 days will be from after we finish this program. So we're gonna go in, we're gonna give you 30 days. In all honesty, you're gonna get more days than that because we can't do all of this in 30 days. So you're gonna have zones. This is gonna be talked about for a while.
Yeah, okay,
After all of that, after we say zone, is it 13?
Zone 13, I believe.
Zone 13 is complete, 1 through 13 are complete. We have met the obligations of this policy, then we're gonna switch into this where we can remove things, because things that are against the roadway, 2 things. They're a safety hazard, and if somebody hits them, they can immediately sue the town if
Right.
we're aware of it, and they can immediately sue the person who did it. So it's a way for us to get those things and go ahead and keep that liability off the town. So that was kind of our thought in that. So then things outside of that 8 to 10 foot, you would have 15 days to remove it, reach out to us, come up with a solution on what's going to happen or whatnot. Now, currently, Scott and I, if we see somebody, typically I call Scott, but Scott goes out and he stops them. If I see them in the act of putting in post and rope, I pull over. I say, hey, you can't do that. This is what the town ordinance is. Because I don't want our people wasting money putting in things that we're just going to tell them to remove. If it's after the fact, if I miss it while they're doing it, then typically I just tell Scott. That way he can start the record, and the whole process can be there.
right, okay.
And in most cases, when I have to go out and make contact with those people, there is no citation ever issued. It's record is generated just to track the event, communicate with them till they get it fixed. And like I said, 9 out of 10 times, it's not a big deal. They come into compliance, so.
Yeah, well, what I was thinking was that, if they've got a tree and all there, then it might take them more than 15 days to hire somebody to do all of that. If it's just small shrubs and all, then yeah, but something big.
So in the zoning world, it's a little different than the police world. We want you to come into compliance. We can't just stop you. we don't have quite the same authority. So we do work with, we work with people. You come in and you let us know you're trying, then we're going to work with you within reason. Now, if you're still trying 3 years later,
Right.
you're not trying.
Yeah.
But if you're, if you're in contact with, and that's what Scott's saying, on the majority of things that people have passed the time, as long as we have continued to work towards a solution,
Right.
we have not been like, oh, you owe us $4,000. We
I just know
you
how it is to try to hire somebody
yeah.
to do anything now.
Yep, but we just need a positive that you're working
Right.
working towards it. And the hope is that once we've got this program set up and people don't walk out in their front yard and go, oh, look, there's 15 palm trees in right there between me and the road, me and the next road over, then they're not going to think, oh, I can automatically put something in here.
Right.
We had a recent Board of Adjustment case, and that was one of the things they were asking for additional driveway space. It's kind of hard because if they stand on their corner lot and look at the other corners, none of them are in compliance with the driveway. Some of that because those houses were built in the 60s, 70s, 80s when the driveway restrictions weren't in. Some of them because they did after fact and we didn't catch them. It was during a period that we really weren't actively enforcing things. So it's hard for the public to go out and say, why can't I have this when everybody else has it? But if you walk out and it is clear from this line forward, right and left of you, you're less apt to just put something
Do
in.
anything, yeah, that's right.
And your neighbors are more apt to be like, I had to take my stuff out. You can't have your stuff there. So you'll have more working together and there will be a much bigger awareness of it, where right now our right-of-ways look like, I can put something out there if I want to. Everybody else has something.
And initially, I think it's important to mention that I did have timelines put into the policy. Those had to be stripped out. So even before anything started to happen, there'd be a 60-day notification. Originally, that was what we proposed.
Oh, yeah, that's
So,
fine. Dave.
so yeah, and then the whole time we're moving through those sections, we're giving notifications to the next one. So in the event they have that tree or that large landscaping project that they need to move or whatever the case may be, they do have ample notification to do so. And then even if they come inside of that time period, as I said before, if they are working on it, we've been able to kind of get through stuff without escalating.
Well, I knew you would be fair with people, but I just wanted to.
You wanted them to know that we were going to be
Right,
fair.
let them know that we're going to be fair.
We are. Like I say, at the end of the day, our goal is to meet the ordinances, not
Right. Punish
to
anybody.
fine people or punish
Yeah.
anybody. It's just to work together and meet the ordinances. And a lot of people don't understand that the ordinances in the right-of-way really are a safety issue. Zoning can be tough because a lot of zoning issues are a preference on how the town wants things to look, where this is actually, we want the town to be safer for the pedestrian, for our utility workers, for our police, for our fire. For Scott, when he's standing on the side of the road, we want them to be able to get off the road and be safe and do their work and come home to their families at night.
And we'll have more room to put the trash cans in.
Yes, sir, we will have more room to put the trash cans in.
So the only thing that should be in a right of way is the mailbox. The mailbox would still be allowed?
There would be
Yeah.
the trees that are protected by the ordinance.
Right.
Now,
That's federal, so.
Right.
according to the ordinance, palms are not trees. I am just going to get that out there
Right.
now. Palms are palms. They are not coastal forest overlay district trees. They are not native species promoting habitat, wildlife habitat. So the trees, the mailboxes. We do have older crossovers with our older subdivisions and some of our own crossovers that extend into the right-of-way. So those beach accesses are not intended to be removed and taken. And then, is there anything else?
There were engineered retaining walls that either A, protect public infrastructure or keep the sand out of the road, et cetera. Some fire hydrants are kept clear by some of those retaining walls. And then other than that, I think everything else was covered by the CFO trees, et cetera.
So after the the notice is given, And they go in and either they, you know, comply and remove their stuff. If they don't comply, we send them a letter. We don't go in and act as their landscaper, though. We're not gonna go in and we're not gonna dig up and eat the cost of being their landscaper, or are we?
After a certain time.
So the ordinance reads that we can put a lien on the property if we do it. So that's something that we've kind of, I guess, got to finalize as we go through this process. I would prefer that we do like zone 1 and 2, and everybody that didn't do it, we contract someone to come in that has the correct equipment and the abilities to fix that, to, you know, to pull whatever out. Now, some of that may be small stuff that you're really not regrading or doing anything like that. The anticipation would be that the homeowner would be given that cost, that by choosing not to do it, you don't win by having to not pay for it to be done. That is our intent, and it's also our intent not to have our employees be the people doing it, just because they already have enough work. They're already busy, and I don't think we really have the time to do that.
And there is also the section 1.6C that's basically the portion of our general ordinance that states every day beyond the initial day is considered a separate offense, and it can be a $50 fine. That is cumulative. Now, that has been a motivator for people to come into compliance, and when they do come into compliance, it has been a thing we have waived. Because $50 a day is roughly $1,500 a month. It gets expensive fast. So that is also an option for trying to motivate compliance. It is the primary tool laid out in our ordinance. So that is what I defer to in almost all cases.
So kind of our last slide is, again, taken from that original presentation. What are our steps moving forward? We have developed a policy handbook and have given it to y'all to look at and kind of think through and see what you think. We did leave in the ordinances, you will see at the end, the track changes are on so that you can see what the original ordinance said, what we struck through, and what we added back, because we wanted to make sure that that was clear on the changes that we were thinking about making. So once we agree on a policy and a timeline, we could start the public outreach through social media and town website. We would also be sending letters. The first mailing would be a massive mailing because phase 1 is a town-wide incentive. So I will need to budget for that, just so you know, so that we can send those letters to everybody. Once we get through phase 1, our intent is as we start each zone, Scott would kind of ride through, see what areas are still not in compliance. Because the initial letter we send out is going to lay out the whole program. So they can choose to just do phase 1, or they can choose to go ahead and do everything at once, because if you're paying somebody to come out and fix it, why wouldn't you just pay them once? But he will then start writing each zone. And as we go into those, then we will send a letter to the people who still have things in the right-of-way or within that 8 to 10 foot clear zone. And we will just slowly go through all 12 or 13 districts until we get done with phase 2, and then we will start back with the total right-of-way. Our hope is that with the total right-of-way clearing, that it will be less, because when people cleared for phases 1 and 2, they went ahead and got everything instead of doing it in steps. We anticipate this to be a multi-year project just because of the amount of stuff that is currently within the right-of-way and the amount of time that it takes, just to document this, to show that we are, that we're transparent, this is what we're doing, we're being fair across the board, and whatnot. And one of those things is the town will start, we will be the example. We have some things that we will be removing once this policy gets in. There are some things that we will be sliding back just a little bit or removing to lead by example. So that is all that I had in my slide. Is there anything else? Mr. Shugarts, you look like you got something.
No reward for doing it early, right?
You don't get a nasty letter, or you don't get a letter from us asking you to do it if you go ahead and do it.
Well, you've already been on me, so I guess I might have to go ahead and do it.
I may have mentioned something to you in passing.
Yeah. But, so don't think she lets anybody off. She does. So anyway, I think this will be a good thing for the town. I think it'll make the town look a lot better, make it a lot safer. And I know we've all, we always look at our front yard, like she said, goes to the edge of the road. And, or most people do. Some people don't because they don't cut the grass out there. But anyway, most of us look at it and see think our property goes to the edge of the road. But there is a right-of-way there, and it's there for a purpose. So that's what we're trying to get straightened out, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And we appreciate it. So what do you need from us?
I need you to let me know that you're happy with the policy as written so that we can move forward. And then we'll just need direction on how to move forward and when to move forward.
Yeah.
Kyle?
Okay.
So that essentially, and I think that Ms. Kimes and Mr. Hitchings did a fantastic job at putting this stuff together, and in consultation with other departments and their needs, and
Right.
we think the whole town kind of understands this, but ultimately, when we started discussing this, there was a lot of questions and a lot of concern. So we diligently tried to go through scenarios and prepare this from what we thought was going to be something that is generally palatable for council to support and move forward. So essentially, what I need to know is that council supports this approach. And then I will certainly work with Amy to effectuate the program moving forward, unless there's some major dissension that you need more information on something, because if not, we'll start moving into the next phase, preparing our communication materials, preparing draft letters, and as much as you all want to be involved in that, we certainly would be happy to have you involved in that. But really just starting to think about the public information that's going to have to go out, so that when Scott goes to do his job, he's not met with more resistance than necessary, but it will be there. So really just need a consensus from council that you guys are ready.
And I think the more information we can get out about it,
Yes, sir.
the less Scott's gonna run into, then people won't be as likely to say, well, I didn't know anything about this. I hadn't been told. So it's gonna be a communication and an education is what we need to do.
Well, we need to go on forward with it
Yeah.
and quit putting it off.
Well, they going
do
to.
it.
That's what they've been doing.
So, Doug, I got a question. What, I'm for this 100%, so it's not a negative. What's, in the public perception, I think that's what is the public perception, and how do we make sure that we address that?
That's what the education is
Yes.
about.
Yeah.
That's
To
my,
to change the public conception to what it needs to be.
What do you think it is, Amy? What do you think the public perception will be?
It's mine.
Everything is mine. It's all mine. None of it's yours.
That's right. That's why you got to be educated.
But I think that, Mr. Shugarts, that's really why we looked at the multiple phases. Price and I had this conversation. It's really hard to say, I need to clean all the way to the right of way because something in the ground might break. Because from my standpoint, sitting there on my property, I don't even see the thing in the ground. I don't really care. It's been there for 30 years. Why is it suddenly going to break? That being said, I also don't see the roots that are growing in there. I don't, being the general public, I don't see all of those things. What I do see from that 8 to 10 foot area, which I think is a way to start and get it more out there, is the ambulance parked in the middle of the road, and me having to stop and, and try to drive around while dodging emergency services people. What I do see is every time I drive down South Shore, leaving the pier area, I have to drive 5 miles an hour because there's so many people in the middle of the road. And it's not that they're just being rude. They don't have anywhere to go other
There's nowhere else
than
for them to walk.
the road. So, those are the things that you can see. I think they're the things that we can even have some town staff go out, some working pictures where we show in some of our public outreach. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have actually gotten out of the road to do this work and not impeded your day? Some things like that. So that was my thought on the 8 to 10 foot beginning approach, was that those are clearly things that you encounter every day being on the island. Now, off the island, this may be a little bit more of a sell. Because like I said, the homeowners association seems to do more things. So there just may not be as much pushback, but on the island, you're constantly stopping in traffic because somebody can't get off the road where they need to get. So I'm hopeful that will be helpful. And then the other thing that we do need, Kyle, is those ordinances need to be adopted. If you are good with them, I can bring them back to the March council meeting for adoption if you're good with the changes that are in there.
I think so.
Well, in Dogwood Lakes, there's a councilman, Helms, there's a tree that goes over the sidewalk, and every time I walk, that trees get in my face, so I don't know if you
I thought he had all the trees removed.
You don't ever walk to
So that is one thing.
That's when he's running off the road. That's
Street trees were required as part of the zoning approval for certain subdivisions. Those trees would not be removed that were required by the ordinances.
okay. Our ordinances now, do they make sure that the trees that are put in are far enough off?
Our ordinance currently requires street trees be placed. So like in Waterside and Magnolia Reserve, there is a utility strip, devil strip, whatever, between the sidewalk and the curb and gutter.
And that's where they're putting the trees?
Yes, sir. We have, Kyle and I have.
We're going backwards there.
We've had a lot of conversation about this, Kyle and myself and Mr. Price, because he doesn't like me planting trees on top of his sewer and water pipes.
Right.
That is something, as we have discussed multiple times, we're currently working on the comp plan update. The comp plan update is going to roll, if funded, into a ordinance rewrite, and that is something we're going to be looking at in the ordinance. We already require, at a minimum, a front yard and a rear yard tree be planted before CO can be issued on every lot. So we are trying to keep some of that, some of the trees, that are being taken down. So we already require that. That'll be in the ordinance rewrite. I have not initiated major ordinance rewrites in Appendix A because it is anticipated that we will have major ordinance rewrites sometime starting next fall if funded.
But right now, they can go ahead and plant those trees within that 8-foot clear strip, right?
Yes, sir. The preliminary plats were approved prior to Mr. Brewer and myself getting into this position. So they are planting them now.
Can we?
All right, how long would it take to bring a rewrite of that part of that ordinance to be voted on?
2 months, 2 to 3 months.
Can we stop it now?
No, evidently not.
I thought we had reviewed all the policies and orders, brought them into compliance and updated them.
No, they
We
hadn't.
brought them.
They never
We
did
brought them
finish.
into.
They never finished it.
No, they never finished.
So there's two completely separate things. We worked on the chapters up front, which are chapters 1 through 18, and then there's zoning ordinances, which are in appendixes A, B, and C. So we did the 160D updates to Appendix A, B, and C that brought us into compliance with the new legislative changes when we changed to 160D, with the intent to rewrite the ordinances completely based on the comprehensive land use plan. The 160D legislation put a lot more emphasis on the comprehensive land use plan, and your ordinance is reflecting that. Our land use plan is from 2005 and doesn't show a significant part of the off-island land in it, nor does it look at an area outside of the town limits that was in 2005. So the intent of our new comprehensive land use plan is to also look at, if people want to annex in within a reasonable area, how we want that to look as well, so that y'all can make,
So bottom line, you don't brought all your policies and orders
No,
in
sir.
line. Thank you.
sorry, that was wordy.
So,
We were led to believe everybody had, basically.
but here's the problem. Okay. Somebody that is already there, you're gonna go make them pull a tree out, which I'm in agreement with, that's in that devil strip on the side of the road. But now, if you're going into a new community, then you can plant a tree in that devil strip.
Correct,
Is that right?
correct.
That doesn't sound like that's fair to me.
The trees are also supposed to be the Coastal Forest Overlay District.
The what?
The trees are also supposed to be supported by the ordinances and are the same trees that we are protecting elsewhere.
That's still putting a burden on utilities and everybody else, putting those trees there.
We need to look at our policies and bring it up to date.
That is double-sided.
I mean, why can't they
Two-phase.
put the trees behind the sidewalk?
I'm not necessarily
I
opposed
think
to
they
that.
look just as good behind the sidewalk as between the sidewalk and the street.
And that's the discussion that we have had, has been, whenever the town moved forward requiring these street trees, that was through the subdivision ordinance and the subdivision requirements that you had to do that.
Right, we had Todd here then.
Yeah, so what needs to happen, and I think everybody is in agreement with this, is that when you record that plat, you have to have an easement outside of the right-of-way for a landscaping easement, and that's where street trees should go. That's what the subdivision in regards to street trees needs, that's how that needs to read if the town wants to continue to see us requiring those street trees, or just to keep it as, I think what our ordinance requires, a tree to be planted in the front yard and the backyard. So those are some options, but what Amy was referring to is that, and Councilman Fowler, I just want to update real quick, but the ordinances in which were all evaluated were the town ordinances, but then the zoning and subdivision ordinances have to be completed once our comprehensive plan is done, because that is what sets forth the policies and guidelines to make rules. And that's what Amy was saying, is that the state requires local jurisdictions to have an updated comprehensive plan that shows that there is support for the zoning and subdivision ordinances. So everybody went through the ordinances per department for police, and that's when we were talking about skateboarding in streets and, all of those
Is
ordinances.
that part of our policy?
Those were all reviewed.
different
The
than
subdivision
doing a
and
house.
zoning, we time-wise cannot do that until Amy is completed with her comprehensive plan. So just for process-wise, we can't touch zoning and subdivision on a holistic level until her comprehensive plan is completed.
Right.
Because we have to, by law, show consistency with that plan to change those types of ordinances. But our town ordinances, that whole program was completed. And every
Okay.
department reviewed every single chapter.
Except for that final
Zoning
step,
and
right?
zoning and subdivision,
Yeah,
yes.
because the way it is right now, all right, if I build a house in town, I've got to have one tree in the front yard and one tree in the backyard, right?
It is based on the size of your lot, so it starts at a minimum of one in the front and one in the back, and then increases. 10 to 15,000 square feet is one front yard and two rear yard. 15,000 to 20,000 is 2 front yard and 2 rear yard.
Okay, but you don't plant those
Those have to be within your property
within
boundary.
your property lines, yeah.
Yes, and the street trees have
So,
traditionally
I mean,
been in
I don't
addition.
understand why we got away from that to going into subdivisions and putting them on the right of way,
Todd,
huh?
Todd.
So part of,
It is in combination,
question?
correct?
it's in combination.
Todd.
That is actually standard practice in other municipalities. It's not kind of just a here thing. So y'all know my background is engineering and traffic. But there's always an argument about should trees even be in the right of way because people run into trees. So there's, I'm not a huge component of trees in the right of way, but from a planning standpoint, they provide that unifying element for the community. If they're in the right of ways and you do have an arborist or whatnot, you can maintain that tree canopy where I can't go on your property. So like driving Waterside, probably a third of the trees, the pretty crepe myrtles that they planted in the front yard are little palms about this big now. So people are pulling those trees out of their yards. We require them to be put in at CO, but then they're just going in and pulling them out and planting something that they want better. So the street trees do provide the opportunity for the town to have that tree canopy that we would like, which has all kinds of good environmental side effects, and to be able to control it where we can't really go in and control the trees on the property quite as well. But the placement of them could be better.
Who is responsible for the pruning of those trees?
And that is a good question. If we don't own the streets, then the homeowners association is. And then in some, like in saltwater landing, we didn't take the shoulders or whatnot, so their homeowners association would still be responsible for trimming them. That could also be something that we add, that those are installed by encroachment and that the homeowners association would be responsible. Even if it was our, even if we did take over the street to the right of way, we could have an agreement with the homeowners association that things are in there by encroachment and that they must maintain them and take liability.
Okay,
But I am happy to take, make small changes and clarifications in the policy. I just haven't done a whole rewrite because we can't really do that until the comp plan is complete.
In that rewrite, we had addressed that it couldn't be a palm tree, right? That it had to be like a live oak or a crepe myrtle or.
So apparently there has been some different interpretations over the life of the town. In here, it says that they must be trees from the North Carolina Cooperative, that salt-tolerant tree list. On the salt-tolerant plant list, it clearly identifies large trees and small trees, whether they're highly, moderately, or slightly, and then it has shrubs, vines, and palms. I interpret that if it's not on the tree, if it's not listed as a tree, it's not a tree. And people have argued, well, you call it a palm tree, and it's on the pamphlet, and my argument is the vines are on the pamphlet too. So if it's not listed as a tree on that list, I have not been allowing it as a tree.
okay. Well, sounds like we're working toward it anyway, right?
Yes, sir. I can certainly look at this one to bring back because Scott is looking right now at the sign ordinances. They conflict on how much size you can have where. So we're not necessarily changing them as much as we're not saying one thing here and something different here. So we're clarifying some things. So anticipate having those come before you in the next couple months as well.
Okay. We just want to make sure you've got something to do.
I can assure you, we have a lot to do, but thank you for checking in.
Okay. All right, you got anything else to add, Kyle?
No, sir, Mr. Mayor. I'll just say that for consistency wise, for this element, I would say that we'll add the street tree for new subdivisions for that easement outside the right of way, so that if the next subdivision that comes in, let's go ahead and effectuate that change right now so that we are consistent and fair in this other policy that we are enforcing.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll make sure that gets added into those ordinances, so that when we move forward with all the other stuff, we take care of that.
Okay, because has to go to planning
Planning
and then,
board,
so
yes.
just
Maybe so.
the
Yeah.
16, the chapter 16 stuff can just come straight to y'all,
Yeah.
and that's why it will be brought before you next month. The other because it's in the zoning ordinance, it has to go through planning board prior, so it will not be brought to you on March 1st. It will be brought hopefully the following month.
Okay. All right. Anything else? You satisfied?
I'm satisfied.
Everybody satisfied? Okay.
Let's move this house.
All right. Amy says, get off of me, please. Okay, this one ought to be fairly quick and short. House moving permit.
I'll take that one.
Okay, he's gonna be brief on that.
So it's been our procedure in the past to come up with council as the last step before we move a structure off the island. I've been working with Amy in planning and Steve in inspections. This has been a process that's been going on for about the last 6 months. The structure is currently at 822 South Topsail Drive. Todd Johnson is the contractor, and Carolina House Movers will be moving the structure from there into Holly Ridge. The plan is to move it on February 26th. The permit says they can start at sunrise, and I've made it very clear to the contractor that their wheels on that truck must be turning at 6:50 a.m. when there's legal sunrise. My plan is to get them over the Surf City Bridge within 40 minutes, outside of the town of Surf City within an hour and a half. So we're done by shortly after 8 o'clock. So the impacts to our residents will be minimal. The permit, when I talked to DOT, they issued it, said Saturday sunrise, or Sunday sunrise to 10 a.m. was our hours of operation. So we're looking next Saturday, 6:50 a.m. to get it across the bridge. So if you approve it, we will start putting stuff out on social media, message board sign in the traffic circle to announce to our residents that there will be delays that morning, and possibly work with Mr. Brewer and put it on the code red callback system to let everybody know
Okay.
we're gonna be moving that house.
Do I have a motion
I
to
make a
approve?
motion, we approve.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand.
I'm voting for Don too.
Oh, are you? Okay. All right,
good.
you got it.
Okay, I got.
Just get it, so
I
you're
got
gonna get it
one-
out on, get it out to the public?
Yes, sir, we will.
Okay.
Yep. I have one more short thing to share with you. I don't know if council is aware of this or not, but we responded to a very serious incident last night on Watts Landing Road at the request of Pender County Sheriff's Office, where 2 people's lives were lost. Myself, Sergeant Peterson, were the first on scene, followed shortly thereafter by numerous Surf City police officers. The officers not only able to handle the stress of the situation, but acted as true professionals, securing multiple crime scenes over a large area. And then we also rendered aid to the victims, but we didn't alone render aid. Surf City Fire Department was also there, and they took life-saving measures. And I wanted to ask the chief, please express my thanks to the firefighters on scene. True professionals. They've represented themselves, the fire department, and the town very well. Pender County Sheriff's Office then got information on where the suspect was. They requested assistance from Surf City again. We deployed our K-9 and drone team out off Stag Drive by Highway 17 and assisted in the successful arrest of a homicide suspect. Not only is our training and equipment, but overall structure to include our policy and procedures allows us to be a professional department, successful and staffed by professionals. I just want to share that with you guys, what we were doing. And how proud I am of our officers and their actions they took last night.
Well, I appreciate that. And even though all Surf City Police handled all of it over here, so they were doing it, but it was not in Surf City.
No, sir, it was actually in the
right.
county. We were requested by mutual aid to aid Pender
Right.
County in their
And,
efforts.
Which I appreciate you very quickly answering it. Because it might have been a long time before the other department got there.
Yes, sir, we were there within just a couple minutes of the initial
Right.
call. So,
Yeah, I figured something because I was on the island and I couldn't tell who it was, but anyway, one of them cut on his siren at the roundabout there, and so I figured it must be something
It was a very serious situation.
Serious, yeah.
But,
But we did have 2 people murdered, right?
yes, sir, we did. And
So,
the suspect that murdered them is in custody.
Right. Okay. I appreciate it. Appreciate your work there.
Thank you.
You got anything else you
No,
want?
sir, that's it. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Okay, you too. Thank you, and thank you for all your work. Okay. Update fee schedule on, this should be short too.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. So it appears that there was fees implemented in 2014. The town had consulted with a telecommunications specialist to be under contract with the town to review any sort of applications regarding telecommunication towers. So when we haven't had a lot of activity with this, but when this came up, Amy was unaware of it. Certainly I was unaware of anything in there. This has never been carried over in any sort of fee schedule. So what Amy is requesting, and she can provide elaboration if necessary, is to re-implement the fees that were associated with the town's contract with this telecommunication review, and then those fees get passed along to the applicant essentially. So we do not pay for that consultant review. It is taken out of these fees, but over the last at least 2 fiscal years that I know of, they were not included. So we would certainly request that council amend the fee schedule to implement those fees.
Okay. Do I have a motion for her to amend the,
I'll make a motion.
okay, second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye, raise your hand. Okay, you got it, Miss Amy. All right. We are supposed to discuss something on plastic waste, but Kyle and I have talked about it, and we think what we need to do is bring it up later on, maybe at our business luncheon, because we need some input from the businesses, because it's going to have more effect on the business than it is anybody else. I just don't think we're at a point that we can say, all right, folks, you can't have any more plastic, because it's going to be a big burden on some of them. And I think maybe we can come to, a certain degree on the plastic, but without just having an all-out ban on plastic. So we'll work on that as we go. Maybe Kyle and some of the rest of them can have some information for us, and then maybe put something out ahead in the communications about what we're discussing, so they'll have some answers for us when they come to the meeting. Okay? And then we also had somebody call about concerning meeting times for council meetings. I don't know whether you want to do anything about the time that we have our meeting, which is at 4:30 in the afternoon, or not.
I like the meeting time that we have. I'm not opposed to it at all. 4:30?
Yeah, I like it. Well, we just had some people that wanted it later in the afternoon after they got off work. So.
Look, we had it at 7 o'clock, they fussed about it. We
Well-
put it at 4:30, they're fussing about it. Stick with your 4:30.
Well, if we change it again, then we could have some more fussing.
Well, we don't need no more fussing. Leave it like it is.
Okay, anybody else want to chime in? Nobody wants to chime in, so I guess we'll just leave it like it is. Okay,
Smart thing to do.
all right, okay. I hear you, Don. Okay, all right. That's about all I've got. I'll leave it up to the town manager now. What else you got?
Just to thank you for your attention, as always. I mean, there's a lot of information today, and I think we had a good work session. So
It was, I think it was excellent.
Yeah.
The right-of-way and the parking,
yeah.
a lot of good information there.
So hopefully we're coming to a culmination on some larger projects and getting ready to start new larger
Right,
projects.
that's
So
true.
That's where we're at.
Always working on something.
Yes, sir.
Okay, if nothing else, you got anything? Okay, if nothing else, prayers. Okay, appreciate it. Say I went too fast, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You ought to tap me on the arm.